Welcome everyone to another Forensic Focus. It's evening for myself, morning for Sai, and we're joined by Chris Doman, who is also in the UK. Nice, bright, early morning for him as well. And he's from, oh, I should have asked how I pronounce this before I started the intro, but is it Cado?
I don't care how you pronounce it, but I pronounce it Cado.
Cado, okay.
Whatever is fine.
Yeah, from
I'd
Australia,
assume the
we'd
long
butcher it
A
anyway.
as well. Yeah.
I'm just like Cado. Yeah, can get the accent there. But welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we always like to start with a bit of an introduction to yourself and how you ended up where you are. So maybe you could just give us a brief background of where you are now and kind of how you got there.
Yeah, sure. So where I'm now is at Cado Security, kind of cloud forensics and incident response software provider. Co-founded the company about 4 years ago with James. He is also Australian, so good kind of Aussie UK kind of backgrounds there. Before this, I was at Alien Vault. I've used their kind of threat intelligence products. I did a lot of kind of software engineering on that. Before that, classic Big Four DFIR. I was at PwC for about 4 or 5 years, doing all the kind of fun of going after the clients when they had problems. And I got into cybersecurity through the DC3 competition. I'm not sure if you remember, but the US DoD used to do this really cool free fantastic forensics competition. Really good thing. So I did well on that, and off the back of that, I got my first job.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
wow.
really cool. I actually only know DC3 because I did one of their courses, not from the competition. I'm not sure whether maybe they still do it, but I just remember doing a course with them. No, okay.
Now they ran it for about 10 years. It was really good. It had like 100 different questions. We
Yeah,
exercised some coding, some forensics, some unsolved problems you had to research. So it was a really great way of getting, like new people in the industry without
yeah,
having to pay anything too. So it's a really good kind of equalizer.
yeah. Nice, nice.
Excellent. Oh, well, we'll see if they're still around and put a link in. Because, I mean, if it's good enough to get you your first job, I think that's something that we should probably share with the audience. So, I mean, before that, did you come from a technical background, or are you, a previous ballet dancer, or, how did you come to this?
I definitely cannot dance. Standard like computer science degree, I was like, hacking around writing code and stuff at a young age. So went through that. Then went off to a different kind of like marketing career for a couple of years after uni, just because I was so sick of computers. And then came back to my first love. So kind of had a brief segue there.
So co-founding a company, I mean, that's a brave step in the world. What put the two of you together in the way that made you risk your livelihood by deciding this was a good idea?
Yeah, it's definitely a scary thing to do. So we started the company the first week of COVID, right, when all that stuff was in the news. And then James and I looked at each other like, we still doing this? And like, yeah, I guess so. It ended up working out pretty good timing actually, because people needed to do kind of remote cloud stuff quite a lot. But definitely it is an interesting experience starting a company and growing it to now about 50 people. So fairly fast growth in 4 years.
Yeah,
That is
wow.
impressive, yeah.
Did you? So when you did start it was just you two together, and that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, so James is my boss at PwC. He was running a lot of the kind of building up the UK IR practice, and before that, he was in the ASD in Australia, responding to incidents there.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, it means a lot of
Oh,
people in Australia know him, but they met him for the first time when they had a big incident, and it's like, oh, I
Oh,
met you that
yeah.
time, didn't I? So he has a lot of those when I meet like
I
people at
have
Australian
I have
companies.
so many unfortunate friends that way, and you're always like, they're like, we hope we never see you at this job again.
it's,
Yeah,
it's when you
yeah, he's
walk into a room and they start twitching nervously just out of a sort of Pavlovian response that you need to start worrying.
Yeah, yeah. They
yeah.
they're twitching that stress leave application in.
Yeah, I think the Aussie government's done a good job though. But yeah,
Mm.
Something I'm slightly jealous of you guys for. The people you work with, you can turn into friends as a criminal defence forensic expert. Generally speaking, I don't want to know the people I work with particularly well. So, of course, they're all innocent. But anyway,
Let's talk about when you first started the company, like, and moving into COVID. That would have been interesting. So, did you have quite a good market looking for that kind of stuff, like straight out of the gate?
Yeah, I mean, so we looked at doing a few different things when we started. So we tested some ideas, with like putting out some blog posts saying if it existed, would you have it? The best kind of like feedback we got was around collecting forensic evidence of like cloud environments like AWS, that kind of stuff. So we put out a couple of free tools to collect like EC2 virtual machines, those kind of things.
Okay.
And we got good feedbacks around that. And then we also released another free tool to like collect more triage evidence, a bit like Cape, similar kind of concept, which is good time with COVID because suddenly everyone's working remote. So we had a lot of like uptake of those free tools, and then we ran with it and kind of commercialized it off the back of that.
Okay. So do you still run any free tools, like any open source stuff, or is it all you've commercialized it all now? As
So we kind of changed it. So now we have a community edition. So it's
sweet.
Cado Community deploys into your cloud environment. So we don't keep anyone's data. We don't want to do SaaS and stuff with forensics for kind of obvious reasons. And then people can deploy that and it'll process evidence. It won't collect it though, but you can use other tools like Velociraptor or Cape or something and send it into community edition and that will work.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, still having that community edition.
You say that you don't have. Sorry, you don't ship the collection tools with the community edition. That's fair enough. So you do have a wide range in the commercial product of collection tools as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's often not the value of kind of why people want to get the product in the first place. Particularly getting for things like containerized environments, Kubernetes. There's like 5 or 6 different ways of getting data from Kubernetes, Docker, Containerd systems. And the one you have to go for depends entirely on your kind of security setup and all these other various things. So that's a hard problem to solve, and that's why that's kind of the core kind of commercial product there. We get a lot of ask around that kind of stuff.
So it is your. I mean, it is entirely your developed product because nobody else has a tool for doing this. Or sorry, let me rephrase. There may be other commercial tools for doing this, but it's not. There's no open source solution for doing this. Is probably the direction I'm heading in.
I think for so much like cloud forensics, there is the option of chaining together like 20 different open source tools, which can work depending on who you are and what you want. But yeah, we had to write a bunch of our own stuff. We also had to do things like rewrite the Kubernetes API just to speed things up because it depends on how fast you want data. So there's lots of really interesting hard problems to solve when you're messing around with all these kind of newer APIs. Which has made it quite fun for the engineering team to work out how to do this stuff. But there are a few ways of getting this data, though. You don't just have to use us.
So purely from an open source perspective, Kubernetes is open source, I believe, isn't it? So when are you upstreaming your rewrites and your patches and things like that?
Some of it. So for example, on the parsing side, we were using some of the Plasto library. We upstreamed a couple of kind of changes there. So we'd like to do open source where we can. A lot of it wouldn't really make sense to either. I mean, a lot of it's specific for the way that we deploy and the way that it's all chained together. So some of that, I guess.
No, I just happen to think it's really cool that companies give back into the community. So I'll big you up for that that wonderful thing that you're doing, and it is people like you that make things better from a real world perspective, especially for forensic analysts. So that's a really cool thing to do. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about, the mission is like a bit of a cliche now. I haven't talked about the mission, but the wider mission is to help people respond to incidents in the cloud. And that goes beyond things like open sourcing a few tools. There's kind of some like training and stuff that we ship out for the community as well. So try and make sure that everyone can improve too.
So I think before we started recording, in my mind, I had cloud forensics as in you're pushing that service into the cloud, but you're doing forensics for cloud services. So people would already have a cloud environment. So I guess the initial compliance questions that I had might not necessarily apply because they would have, may not, but they would have already solved it. But maybe you can talk about some of the interesting challenges you have, because I know we mentioned like criminal cases with court admissibility before we jumped on the call. But do you come across any of those kind of things, or is it more your clients are commercial and they have a cloud environment and they're going to want to do DFIR?
Yeah, generally it's more along the kind of like cybersecurity triage use cases. There's like a crypto miner in some environment, then you investigate it. But court admissibility does come up, particularly with like the kind of bigger banks and bigger healthcare providers we work with. If they're in healthcare under HIPAA, they have to do investigations, which makes it an interesting kind of case. For us, something that helps a lot is the fact that we deploy into their environments. So, and obviously in the cloud, you can choose what regions it's into. So if you're storing your forensic data, you might end up putting it in Germany if it's like German data, for example. Those kind of things give you some more options. And going to your earlier point, we do also do things like you can collect like a classic forensic disk image, upload to the cloud, then use our product to analyze it too. It's not the core use case, but we do have customers doing that. And that kind of goes through more around some of those kind of classic questions.
Do you have it as well with, like, do you have endpoint collected, or is the main product the parsing? And if they were running like a hybrid environment, you would expect them to roll out something like Velociraptor or Cape and then push all that data into your platform.
It's very open. So there's 1,000 ways of getting data in. So we do collect data, and that's kind of the core value for a lot of those customers. Then we also process it and present it in a standard modern kind of web UI. So you can collect with GRR or Cape, and then we'll happily process that. Also other kind of commercial tools like Tanium, all those kind of EDRs, like SentinelOne and CrowdStrike. We can push out our kind of one-off agent, collect that data, and then suck it up to the cloud. So there's lots of different ways of getting that data and then sticking all in one place. That's part of the technical challenges too, because you have to standardize all that data, which could be from it could be from a floppy disk image, it could be from like a Kubernetes container. There's so many things it could be from.
Yeah. Normalizing data is a fascinating logical problem at the best of times. So the larger your potential data set sources, the harder it gets. I mean, obviously there's two models that you can go about for doing cloud. Well, there's probably more than two models, but essentially you've got cloud to cloud or cloud to download and then process locally. Why did you choose cloud to cloud, and what are the advantages of doing it this way versus just pulling it and then running it through a standard forensic desktop thing?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a lot on kind of what your architecture looks like and how many cases you're doing, how important speed is. Obviously, I've got my preference given that we went down this route. But some of the clear ones is you're keeping the data in the cloud. So everything's a lot faster. You can go through a couple of clicks, get a copy of 100 EC2 virtual machines or something like that, and that will just process through really quickly. There's also potentially lower CapEx costs too. So you're starting and stopping the actual processing as well. So you don't need to have a bunch of servers continuously running off in a forensic lab somewhere. You can start and stop these, and then so long as you're doing that in a sensible way, that works out a lot cheaper. You also kind of avoid egress fees, although that's not as much of an issue as most people think it is. So AWS will charge you money if you download out of AWS because they want you to keep the data in there. The same with Azure, and Google are actually getting rid of some of that stuff, which is very good of Google. But it also means that if it's a really large amount of data, simply downloading to your laptop can take a long time. It can cost quite a lot of money too. And then there's some weird stuff around the way that the security works in the cloud, with IAM and things like that, working cross-account between multiple accounts or multiple cloud providers. That this is the only approach that really works in terms of getting that data, because unless you're actually deployed in that cloud, getting access to those resources is very difficult otherwise.
So I noticed on the website as well with the product, the audit logs and investigations. So you've got records comprehensive audit logs. So that's for the investigators when they're using it. Is that the types of audit logs that you're talking about?
Yeah, so that was a requirement from a lot of banks, as you can imagine, where they need to confirm who had access to what data, and also lock down which investigators can access which projects. So potentially, some investigations will be, and you'll know about this more than I do, more sensitive than others, in which case you need to make sure only certain people access it, make sure that they're doing appropriate things there as well. It's not something I love, the idea that you can be recording every analyst action. It's something that you can turn on or off, but it's just required for some requirements,
Yeah. I guess I could see this being used broader than cybersecurity incidents, like financial fraud, that kind of thing. And if you've got analysts working on that as well, you want to be tracking that audit track. And also adds to court admissibility, right? Like if you can prove what an analyst has done, then can stand in court a bit better. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all part of that. And also, I think particularly some of the requirements there around things like insider threat, where, what if they potentially even know the person there. So again, it's not part of our core use case, given more cybersecurity focus, but given it is a fairly open forensics platform, that's what essentially we're using it for.
I think that's really good because I think that's something that we'll see as a trend. Like I know within Australia, like we've got, I think, we've spoken about it before, but the SOCI Act within Australia, which requires critical infrastructure to have insider threat programs. So I think across the world, like we'll be seeing this more and more where cybersecurity and that insider threat kind of like joins with the tools anyway. So good to see that, and like being having a feature before you really need it for all customers, because I think it'll just creep in to everyone.
Well, it's all overlapping too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, we make extensive notes about everything that we do anyway. Anything that automates that process saves me ink. So, I don't find that necessarily a particularly off-putting concept. You mentioned about scaling, actually, which is, obviously it's one of the key, well, no, it's the key defining feature of the cloud, isn't it? Is that, you don't want something, you turn it off. You do need it, you turn it on. You need more RAM, you download the more RAM, and instantaneously it's there. Does your product contain some automation for that?
Yeah. I mean, and again, quite an interesting problem to solve, to work out how to do that in the most efficient way. So we'll work out what kind of data you're processing, how much of it is there. And when we make a plan of what workers to start, so we have these workers, which are other kind of systems to start and stop, and then we'll chain them and layer them together too. So there's a lot of interesting problems there about doing it in the most efficient way possible, because maybe you want to have one worker per evidence item. Maybe you want to have one worker do multiple evidence items sequentially. And then it also depends on the customer and their limits around how many workers they want to spin up for like cost reasons too. So there's a lot of logic in there. It's an interesting one. If you like playing around with infrastructure, it's a lot of fun. And then working out what the optimum setting is too, because obviously some of these virtual machines or other worker types, they'll have like fast SSD disks. You have to work out the fastest way to kind of use those and make sure the data is being on the right kind of disks too. We do that, and it's an interesting problem.
Fantastic. That is really cool. And in that regard, I mean, I should have structured these questions way better before we started. How are you delivering the service? I mean, this is actually probably a fundamental question that we should have asked at the beginning. Is, are you selling SaaS? Is this we talked about the open source version. That's obviously a different kettle of fish. But I come to you, I go, I run a large international bank. Help. Where do we go from there? What's this actually look like in the real world?
So the way this works is that we deploy into their environments. So in AWS, it'd be CloudFormation or Terraform. So infrastructure as code, similar. Terraform and Azure, Google Cloud, GovCloud announced next week. So I heard it here first. It all deploys as infrastructure via a simple template into the customer's environment. That makes a lot of things so much easier. For one thing, when we were 2 people, I don't think we were trusted with their forensic evidence, which is sensible. We've now gone through all the fun certification processes, but it makes it so much easier. We are looking at supporting a SaaS model, particularly for kind of more mid-sized businesses where they don't have, they're just not as evolved to be able to handle kind of their own infrastructure. That's still kind of TBC, but this all deploys into customer environments, which helps too, because some of the really regulated customers, they don't actually have that much in the way of cloud security tooling often, which is kind of scary, but it's because of those requirements. So they're not allowed to deploy these cloud security tools, which you expect because they're all SaaS, and they simply won't allow them to do the things they need to do.
So when you're deploying this, you're working hand in hand with the customer to develop these programmatic definitions of future deployment of equipment. So you said that they want to keep costs down, therefore they're only going to spin up one worker node. Is that something you're working with them to do, or is it something that they have to define themselves?
I mean, they can ask us for advice, but it's pretty simple. There's just like a setting in there. You can say minimum, maximum, size. You specify that there. And then there's also default settings around things like the life cycle of storage. So often you want to have this evidence preserved permanently, maybe in NKCR1 or more modern or DD format. And then there's all the ways in the cloud around how you can keep those costs down, where maybe after 30 days they automatically switch to cheaper storage, so long-term storage, and all these kind of optimizations. So by default we do all that, but then there's some customization people can make too, and depending on the country and industry, they may have some particular requirements there.
Okay. So, I mean, that then sort of leads to the question of, and it's a question we talk about a lot here, is how, what's the training provision that you guys have for making sure that administrators aren't spending their entire bank's profit margin on AWS things because they've set it wrong?
Well, in terms of like training and things like that, I mean, we go through and we have like an admin session. We'll say, here are the kind of things you'd be setting up. Here's the best practices. And then there's some like safety catches too to make sure that you can't do anything silly like spin up 1,000 workers or leave one on for like a month. That's not possible. It stops it and warns you at that point.
Cool. And from the end user perspective, what's your training sort of program like?
So it's pretty fun. So we go through a classic kind of Linux crypto mining scenario. So you have some detects into the cloud provider. You go through, they hacked into like an Apache server and they installed, it's always XMRig if you're doing investigations in the cloud. You find XMRig, yeah, it is, I know, 90% of the time. There are some more fun ones out there too, but that's the most common one. And then also we have like a more classic kind of Windows case where someone's gone through a few systems and, used PowerShell to deploy malware to move laterally, that kind of classic stuff. But primarily it's all Linux investigations most of the time on the cloud side. So that's what the training reflects.
Do you have, like I know you've got a small team there as well, but is there any support, so say like a customer is trying to do an investigation, do you have any investigation support, or you just have maybe a trusted partner that you would just refer them to?
So we got a team of IR experts where they help us to kind of work what they would do manually so we can automate that. They will provide advice sometimes. But yeah, generally working with partners though. So we work with a lot of kind of IR providers and MSSPs, and then we'll kind of do that kind of sharing there.
Yeah, nice. And then I had a question around, so like your platform ingests a lot of data, not necessarily collects it. How do you guys go if like it's like phone data or like an image of an iPad or something like that? Is that something that the platform can handle, noting that like a lot of, like I can think of a company in Australia that is purely all Mac and they do a lot of work on their phones. So I can imagine that being a thing.
Yeah, I mean, so people have put through images of mobile phones. It's not something that I would suggest. We're not built for that. I mean, they're fantastic tooling out there like Magnet and Celebrite. And then we have support for things like P-lists and the kind of standard forensic artifacts, just because we try to support all the artifacts.
Yeah.
But it's not like a kind of default use case. We collect from Macs where we can kind of do a one-off collection, kind of like a triage collection. And that's important because particularly for the tech companies, they're all Mac. So that's required for that. And then also in the cloud too, often customers actually have Macs running in the cloud because that's where they'll have some build environments. So make sure we support that as well.
Nice. Even the triage would be great because I'm imagining like you've got all this cloud data and you want to like kind of have timestamps for some of the stuff that's happened on the endpoints. So to like lead in rather than the investigator having to switch between like say a magnet or something like that, and then the single pane of glass that everyone likes is always good to have.
Yeah. I mean, that works really well for some of the, particularly the kind of tech investigations we're seeing customers use it for, where a developer's laptop is compromised. Then they pivot to the cloud and they kind of do some malicious stuff. And then you've got a combination there of the kind of cloud provider logs. It might be like guard duty detections are more likely, Cloud Trail telling what APIs are called. And then you have like some of the actual resources, so malicious containers or instances, plus also the developer's kind of laptop. And then seeing, all right, the CREB was stolen here, then this happened, then AWS picks up here. And they're always interesting when there's kind of like a hybrid investigation.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned developer because that's exactly what I was thinking of. I was thinking of the Okta breach from the developer. So like linking, and the fact that they would have had to link cloud authentication logs with the attacker and then try and find out where the creds are gone. I mean,
they're interesting ones because it's a whole kind of new set of attacks. and I think people are still kind of catching up there, and just the number of them is significant too. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of breaches like that going on right now. There's lots of stuff too where people are doing things like they're emailing CloudFormation templates to tech companies. So infrastructure as code. So you deploy a virtual machine with like your template, which does it. But they're emailing people saying they're from like a cloud provider saying, install the security update. So classic phishing, but in the cloud, it spins up malicious stuff in their environment. It's crazy. So there's all these kind of new sets of attacks, which are quite interesting to see.
That's amazing.
Fantastically brilliant.
I watched a talk at B-Sides London on how people aren't paying attention to their hybrid boundaries, like between their on-prem and cloud environment, and they don't treat their like keys as securely as they treat their passwords, because it's just all new and there's so much out there, and the whole IAM is like really hard to wrap your head around. So yeah,
and it's essentially, if you haven't got the authentication and security correct, it's kind of like a flat network, because you can have a breach here and instantaneously in seconds 1,000 other accounts are breached. That couldn't really happen in the same scale as the old days. Plus, people can actually spin up new servers and charge your company money. You couldn't really do that. An attacker couldn't go and install a server in the old days, probably, and then suddenly start billing you all that money. Whereas now that can totally happen. So the kind of the impact of those breaches is
injury, isn't it? Is paying for your own breach.
Yeah, I know. And the cloud providers are nice sometimes. They'll give you a refund, but it kind of depends on how it happened.
Yeah, that's true. To put you on the spot, and we might edit this out if you don't have it, but is there any kind of cool investigation story that you could, or like cool feature that you've had to implement that you can kind of share?
Yeah, there's been a couple. Think about So one of the kind of the early ones that we worked on with a customer was manufacturing. So it's interesting because even though it's not a core cloud use case, which is normally what we talk about, quite high impact. So it was very important manufacturing stuff, leave it at that. But then they had to like quickly identify about 100 different systems, which ones still had this backdoor on after ransomware had done some pretty nasty stuff. So they could collect like 100 systems with us across kind of dispersed geographical area. And then through that, they found the attacker was still hiding by persistence in the Windows registry on a couple of systems. So they had like a backdoor packed in. Turned out they'd been there for quite some time too, which like the EDR hadn't picked up because EDR is not forensic. So they missed that. So that was a really interesting one just because of the impact of that and then the scale. And because early on too, we had to make sure we could scale to support processing 100 systems really fast. So we had to make a couple of tweaks for them there. So that was a really interesting one. And then, yeah, I don't know. I might be thinking of a couple more examples. It kind of depends on the
that one was cool to listen to. Yeah.
So on an ongoing basis, I mean, obviously you're doing development to manage the fact that AWS and Azure and Google are all constantly updating and changing their stuff. But what's your actual release cycle like? Are you agile and push stuff out, or do you have a one drop a quarter, or how does it pan?
Yeah, I mean, so we release 2 or 3 times a week. So John, our director of engineering, joined early on. The first thing he said is, right, we're going to kill the DORA metrics, which is basically around how often you release. It's probably the strongest signal of a strong engineering team. So yeah, 2 or 3 times a week, we put a ton of time into automated testing, which is the only way you can do that, in a stable way. So yeah, we just have an insane number of test data sets as well, and that's kind of how we achieve that. So yeah, 2 or 3 times a week we normally do updates.
And how does that push out to a client? Is it they choose to update, or will it just sort of automatically reach out and pull it in, or they choose to automatically reach out and pull it in? And does it actually? And the other question before you start there is generally speaking, how much effort is it to do? Because it's not rebuild the entire system; it's a patch. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's actually quite an interesting one because it changed early on. I thought naively, people want auto updates, right? Everyone wants auto updates, but absolutely not the case. Particularly if, like, imagine you're a forensic investigation and someone pushes out an update to you. You do not want that. Particularly again, most sophisticated customers, they will want to have control over how they do these updates. I mean, under the hood, it's actually pretty simple. We have a data disk. So we spin up a new system and just switch the disk over with a bunch of checks to make sure it's going to work before we do that. So that's kind of how it works under the hood. With the customer, they just click a button, it does the whole thing, takes like 15 minutes, pretty fast. Or particularly if they're tech companies, they'll manage everything through infrastructure as code. So they'll have their Terraform code normally in a system. They just update the base image in that, so a one-line change, and they then push that, because that's how they like to manage their infrastructure. They don't want to use a button. They want to use code to manage any updates.
So talking about the development cycle, what's kind of exciting that you could share on the roadmap for you guys? Like any exciting features that you can talk about that are coming out, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's some. I'll see if the marketing team hates me now for talking about it too early. but yeah, we've got a bunch of tech partnerships with some large cloud and like EDR vendors we're about to announce probably over the next couple of weeks. So that's pretty exciting. Some large IR providers too. So that's some stuff we're announcing soon. They've been using our stuff a while, but we're going to go in public on that. But in terms of the product, we've done infrastructure as a service for a very long time. So AWS is your Google Cloud. But there's kind of some fun stuff going around SaaS too. So many breaches of things like, Office 365, email breaches, you do all this stuff, right? So you'll see a bunch of these. So there's some stuff coming there pretty soon.
I was just reading before this, the top security predictions for 2024, and SaaS was on there. So is that the focus on like certain SaaS, like majorly used ones? So like what pops to mind is Atlassian is kind of like the major one that a lot of people work with, or is it going to be trying more generic of SaaS?
I mean, at first, pretty big focus around BEC fraud, that kind of stuff, business email compromise. It's because we're working with a lot of MSSPs now, and some of their workloads are like 80% of the investigations they do right now are just email compromise. So not the most technically interesting one sometimes, but very high impact, and particularly for smaller businesses, that can be really, really damaging.
Yeah. The last couple that I've worked on, IRs have been email based, and if without appropriate tooling, it's a nightmare.
They don't make it easy either, right? There's undocumented APIs. There's like 20 different APIs, all which give you slightly different things. So we're hoping we can help there a bit.
Yeah, I always love that as an investigator, being like, I don't know how to read these logs. I'll go to the company's website, and their website is like nowhere near what their logs look like, and you're like, great. Time
the
to
samples
test.
don't work.
Time to test to figure out what these logs actually do.
Well, do you remember there was like a bit of a furore about 5 years ago because Microsoft had this undocumented API, but only certain IR providers knew how to use it. It's like CrowdStrike was banned to do like business email compromise cases, but most of the other small providers couldn't do it because they didn't know about that secret API. And then someone shared how to get it, which is great, and then Microsoft turned the API off because it wasn't designed to be used. So it's interesting problems.
Yeah, that's always fun when you find that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you actually? I mean, from a developer perspective, how are you finding the cloud providers on there? And Google being the one that is typically the people who just turn stuff off randomly and break everything for other people because they don't care. How have you actually found it developing with this as your your major business line? How painful is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty good overall. I mean, as a start, they give you a bunch of free credits because they want to lock you in, but they've all been pretty friendly to work with. Biggest problem, I won't name which cloud provider it was. They basically shut off access to start any virtual machines for everyone in the region because they gave it to one large customer that had an urgent requirement. So the idea the cloud is infinitely scalable isn't true because one very important customer had a very urgent need to start a lot of machines. And then we had to then work around and make sure all of our test pipelines still worked.
Was that when Power World was released? That's not this recent thing, is it?
No, what's Power World? I don't know.
Oh, okay. It's a huge game at the moment, but they essentially took up all the game servers within a whole bunch of regions.
It's not infinitely scalable. That's the thing.
This is
quite region specific. Yeah.
So somebody somewhere actually has a room full of servers. It's not infinite. So yeah.
And we've also breached
It's that T-shirt of the cloud is just someone else's computer.
Yeah,
it has to sit somewhere still.
Yeah. It's actually if I'm going to say some when I was working back in security more, it was like You just replace the word cloud with somebody else's computer and see if you're still happy with the rest of the sentence. Your data is in somebody else's computer. Yeah, well, yeah. So yeah, totally understand that.
I still believe in the promise of the cloud. I mean, I would say that because what I do, but it definitely is. There are limits there, though, that the cloud providers could be more honest about.
Yeah, but you wouldn't buy it if you knew that. So.
That's true.
Especially if you're a large government, suddenly realising that you can't spin up extra machines because somebody with more money than you is doing it is, not something you want to advertise.
And you don't see that in the larger regions, but in the smaller regions, you see that more often.
Yeah.
We've also breached the limits with some of our test sets before for certain resources too, and have had to make code changes on their end to make sure we could do up that stuff for testing too. So it's always a good sign when you start to hit the limits.
It's certainly impressive. And something I was talking to my daughter about this morning because I used to work a long time ago. I used to work at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratories in the UK, where we do our particle physics experiments and stuff. And we were running sort of fraction of a second long experiments and then getting 5 petabytes of data off the back of it, trying to figure out how on earth we manage this data set for science. But yeah, it's
that'd be a fun problem.
It's always fun. Yeah, so big tape robots at the time because we didn't have disk big enough. So
how did the network work? I guess it was very local, right? You weren't shipping that.
Yeah. Well, you say that, but no, we were pushing stuff backwards and forwards to CERN in Geneva. So we were. It was just slow. We would do an experiment, and then 6 weeks later, we'd have all of the data or some of the data over for work on. But yeah, amazing stuff.
So back onto your product, because I was just browsing through some of the features that you guys had. Its main use case is kind of instant response digital forensics. Do you find it being used as a threat hunting tool, as well as do you have integrations where you might ship alerts or certain data to Seams for the benefit of a SOC as well? How does that kind of play into the whole infrastructure and environment?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that as a trend more and more. So, I mean, we built this originally as more like a reactive tool. So you get a detection, we'll go collect the data, analyze it, maybe automatically, particularly because if it's a container, they disappear every 30 minutes. If it's an auto scaling group, they disappear. But we are seeing that more kind of proactive threat hunting now, which is quite interesting. And yeah, exactly, it does get shipped off into their Seam or their data lake. So we'll export all this data, and it's a lot of it because we pass out every zip inside every file, inside every log or whatever, etc. And then people do their own kind of threat hunt queries. We've also had people do things like when Log4Shell, when that vulnerability, it's obviously been used quite a bit.
Everyone was searching for it, yeah.
Yeah, so some people are using our product to look for that in their cloud, because you can add Yara rules or other things too for detections, and because there's not an impact, which is the fun side of the cloud too, is you make a snapshot of a system, it doesn't even know you've done it, whereas in the old days, you couldn't do that. They're doing that to kind of scan key systems for the vuln.
Do you find, from my experience being in incident response and consulting as well, do you find people using your tool for collecting a data inventory or even an endpoint inventory?
I mean, we were looking at that with a couple of customers, but because we go so deep, the breadth isn't such a great fit. We have customers deploying us through other EDR agents, and then they use the EDR agent to see what the inventory is, and then we'll go and suck up certain things to check what that system actually is, because they don't always know, and that kind of thing. So I guess we're kind of the triage investigation tool there.
Yeah, okay. It's always an interesting thing to talk to vendors about this, and even people who are trying to solve it, because I honestly don't think it's in every plan and every framework is have an inventory, but I don't think anyone has a good idea of how to do that well and make it manageable and searchable and easy to update. It's just an Excel spreadsheet at the end of the day is usually what I find.
Yeah, and the fun thing about the cloud is that it changes every 10 minutes. So as soon as you have that data, it's already expired.
Yeah.
So that's why the cloud providers themselves haven't got great inventories. Azure probably has the best. It has kind of a built-in resource manager, but it still can't show you everything. And AWS is trying to ship some stuff there, but it's not very good, frankly.
And I can imagine as soon as they start trying to do that, then it generates an insane amount of logs, and you can't store that many logs that's feasible to search through.
Yeah, it's like if you want to know what it is, I mean, if there's a container that lasts 5 minutes and you're spinning up 10,000 containers every 5 minutes, then shutting them down, by the time you have the data, it's no longer valid anyway. And yeah, exactly, tons of data storage costs. So it's an interesting problem that I look forward to seeing someone else solve.
Me too. And then we can get them on the podcast and they can explain how it is not an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. Well, I guess it is on-prem, right? Or it can be on-prem. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'd sympathise, because it's the first thing in the ISO 27001 handbook, isn't it? It's like have an inventory of your assets. Yeah, no, not going to happen.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense as a concept in the cloud necessarily.
Yeah.
Key assets probably make sense.
So I've probably got one more question because I found your blog resources very interesting to read, and how you simplify chain of custody. So is that just the logs that we were talking about before? Because I'm reading here, it's got like autonomous chain of custody, multi-cloud support, centralized preservation, and standard compliance. They're kind of like the 4 points that it hits on. So is there anything other than the kind of like auditing of investigator logs? And how else do you handle chain of custody for evidence itself?
Yeah, and with an expert witness on the line, I'll be very careful what I say here. So we do the standard stuff when we're collecting the virtual machines, but we'll hash the disk, SHA-256 and the other stuff before and at the end, and then there's kind of standard tools requiring those disks, and then we record a log of who collected that data. That isn't possible with every resource type though. If it's something like a container, there's basically 2 ways of getting containers. One is you can actually get a snapshot, in which case we hash the full disk before and after, we pass out that data. But sometimes you have to get this data live. There's just no other way, in which case we'll log what we can, but there are limits there. And then something else we do as of about a month ago is that we centrally preserve everything. So this is a common customer ask in finance, is that if they collect a system with our tool from on-premise laptops, from Google, Azure, AWS, they can then make sure the copy of that system all ends up in one place. So one storage bucket in one cloud provider, it all gets copied across. And then they have that there for as long as they want. And that's part of kind of like an all-in-one forensics kind of preservation piece that a lot of people are asking for.
Have you had any feedback from like seeing any of those be challenged in court and how successful that's been? Or is that kind of, you just haven't had visibility because maybe customers have just taken that over and run with it themselves?
We haven't, and honestly, most of the things that we're doing here will not see court. It's cybersecurity breaches, ransomware jobs. I mean, there'll be a court element, but this evidence is not going to be used to prosecute someone necessarily. It'll be used for investigations. It'll be shared with third parties though, so there might be a secondary IR firm confirming their findings, that kind of stuff. We see that a lot, but it won't normally go to court. Not this kind of thing. If we were doing like mobile phone forensics, that would be a very common thing, but that's not the road we went down.
Yeah, cool.
In the regard of storing this, I mean, are you encrypting it as part of your product, or is it just the encryption of the platform that's being used that the customer decides and dictates?
Yeah, I mean, that's the nice thing about cloud. Encryption is actually super easy. So they basically have 4 different core encryption options in each cloud provider. They can just pick one, and that depends on where the keys are stored, what encryption options, etc. So that's all done by the cloud provider kind of natively. So we didn't have to do much of that ourselves, which is good.
Excellent. Good stuff. Are you coming to any of the conferences this year and putting out a stand?
We'll be at InfoSec. We do quite a lot with SANS as well. So probably doing a couple of SANS conferences as well. We normally do a couple of talks around like cloud forensics at those things too. So a few of those. Don't think we're doing Forensic Expo though. I mentioned that to Meg on the team. Maybe we will then.
All right. Well, I mean, if you do, I look forward. Forensic Focus will be there, and it would be great to catch up with you in person and come and look at the stand and stuff.
I mean, that would be good. It's probably something we should be doing anyway, actually. And it'd be great to see you for a coffee. I know you'll both be in London soon, so maybe catch you around.
Yeah, no, that'd be brilliant. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us today. It has been fun, and it's fascinating to hear about groundbreaking products put together in the last couple of years. Under strenuous circumstances and fantastic growth, and it sounds like you're doing really well. So I'm excited to see where this is going to go in the future. Thank you very much for joining us, listeners. You can find Forensic Focus on all places where you can find good podcasts, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and also on our own website. There will be a transcript of this, which is a completely pointless statement, because if you're reading the transcript, you know that, and if you've listened this far, you haven't needed the transcript. But anyway, that will also be on the website, as will any useful links that we have discussed during this. I really must script these outros at some point in future. Oh dear.
No, it's a spice. It's a spice of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we hope we'll speak with you again in the future about some new inventions and new things, and how terrible Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud is in terms of keeping their APIs stable. So it'll be great.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Cheers, Lizzie.
Thanks all.